The start of 2016 has witnessed a sharp escalation in the militarization of the South China Sea. The cause of the escalation is multifaceted and comes from both regional and international quarters. The militarization has been initiated and exacerbated by both China and the United States, both bearing responsibility for the current level of tension in the region. The USS John C. Stennis Carrier Strike Group sailed to the region from its home port in Bremerton, Washington on January 15th and passed through the Luzon Strait separating Taiwan and the Philippines on March the 1st. The Stennis is accompanied by the guided missile cruisers, the USS Antietam and the USS Mobile Bay, as well as the guided missile destroyers USS Stockdale and USS Chung Hoon. The Antietam is based at Yokosuka, Japan, and was ordered off its normal patrol to join the Carrier Strike Group. The 7th Fleet flagship, the USS Blue Ridge, is also in the area, having docked in Manila on March the 4th. Trilateral talks were held on board the Blue Ridge on March the 5th between the US Navy, Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces, and the Philippine Navy. The key subject of discussion was how the three nations can work together to confront China in the South China Sea, promote security and stability in the region, and develop future multilateral training and exercises. The current deployment of the Stennis CSG to the region follows the previous deployment of the USS Lamson guided missile destroyer to the Spratly Islands last October, and the USS Curtis Wilbur to the Paracel Islands in late January of this year. The US has also increased surveillance flights over the areas by P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft, as well as in one case B-52 strategic bombers. The navies of China and Vietnam fought a naval engagement for control of the Paracel Islands in 1974, which resulted in China's de facto control of the islands. China has established a military presence on Woody Island since that time, and has engaged in an extensive expansion of the base in recent years. Woody Island now has an extensive military airbase with a number of newly built hangars and munition storage buildings. In February, satellite surveillance revealed the deployment of 2 batteries of HQ-9 surface-to-air missile launchers, as well as supporting vehicles such as an engagement radar and the Type 305B ASAR acquisition radar on the northern end of the island. Last November, China announced the deployment of J-11 fighters to Woody Island. As land reclamation and building efforts on the part of the Chinese continue at Fiery Cross Reef and Mischief Reef in the Spratly Islands, with no signs of slowing down in the immediate future, it will be interesting to see if the US Navy increases the size and tempo of future patrols in the area. With the Royal Australian Navy taking delivery of its second Canberra-class LHD, HMAS Adelaide, on December the 4th of last year, and the first of 2 Makassar-class LPD vessels built by Indonesia for the Philippine Navy, the BRP Tarlac, launched on January 17th of this year, the US Navy may soon be bolstered by more powerful regional navies in future patrols. The Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, announced in November of last year his willingness to have the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces join the US Navy in patrols of the South China Sea. Australian P-3 Orion Maritime Patrol aircraft are currently flying freedom of navigation missions in the region. It was reported just days ago on March the 9th that the United States and Australia were negotiating the basing of more US strategic bombers, including the supersonic B-1 and aerial tankers, at Australian bases on a rotational basis. The aircraft would be based at Tyndall and Darwin in northern Australia. They would complement US B-52 strategic bombers already based at Darwin on a similar rotation. As the brinkmanship continues, with no signs of either China or the United States backing down, the chances of a military confrontation in the South China Sea, whether calculated or accidental, continue to grow with each passing day.
U.S. naval services have released a new maritime strategy, a plan that describes how the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard will design, organize, and employ naval forces in support of its global dominance. The new strategy, titled A Cooperative Strategy for the 21st Century Superpower, highlighted forward, engaged, and ready as key words and kept the original theme of ensuring our capability to intervene overseas. It calls for increasing the Navy's forward presence to 120 ships by 2020, up from about 97 ships today. This includes forward-basing 4 ballistic missile defense destroyers in Spain and stationing another attack submarine in Guam by the end of 2015. The Navy is scheduled to increase presence in the Middle East from 30 ships today to 40 by 2020. The strategy reinforces the continued need to strengthen the partnerships and alliances by stressing the importance of operating in NATO maritime groups and participating in international training exercises. The U.S. strategy emphasizes operating forward and making proxies across the globe, especially in the Indo-Asian Pacific region. Thus, the hard anti-Russian rhetoric of Washington is a sign of the global standoff. At the very same time, the United States is preparing to go deeper and deal with China. The U.S. strategists are concerned about the rise of Chinese naval forces and its expansion to the Pacific Ocean. Particularly, they aim to prevent a situation where China will be able to defend particular zones of sea communications from foreign intervention. This is Chinese DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles purpose. In 2008, the U.S. Department of Defense estimated that China had 60 to 80 missiles and 60 launchers. The risk of establishing area-denied operational environment, for instance, in the South China Sea, worries architects of the strategy. Since the American pivot towards Asia, a tolerant term for the U.S. deterrence policy against China, in 2011, the United States Navy has deployed 60% of all of its powers in Asian-Pacific region. Indeed, it's ready to deploy even more in order to establish its own control in China's zone of interest. Armed with its own unparalleled navy, the U.S. gets a louder voice and more power to restrict military or economy use of the oceans by other countries. In other words, it indicates the U.S. intention to control the trade in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, or even monopolize it in those waters. Now here's where the problem is. In April, China overtook the United States as the world's top importer of crude oil, and 80% of this oil, and many other important resources, China imports through the Malacca Strait, which the Chinese Navy doesn't control. In this context, it's clear why Beijing claims sovereignty over nearly all of the South China Sea, and is building a military base in Djibouti. China supports counter-piracy operations in the Gulf of Aden, conducts humanitarian assistance and disaster response missions enabled by its hospital ship, and participates in large-scale, multinational naval exercises. Washington immediately protested against the China-Djibouti relations and expressed concern over China's plans to build a military base in the Obok region, but to no avail. China has to defend the supply of oil over a long way and isn't able to do it right now. Problem is, it doesn't have enough naval bases along vital shipping lines as of yet. Strings of Pearls strategy, initially suggested as a series of seaports and naval bases stretching along the Indian Ocean, has to resolve this issue. The seaports will be support places and investments that could pay dividends on a strategic level while causing broader security amenities.